First of all, I'm going to give you a heads up. There will be major spoilers for Mass Effect 1 and 2, Undertale, and Life is Strange in this video. Because I'll talk about each game more or less individually, I'll also put up a text warning for each game as I go, but this will be the last audio warning you will receive, so be careful if you're in the habit of minimizing videos. Choice is one of the most recognizable forms of interactivity in games. Be it in gameplay or in the narrative, some of the most memorable moments games can offer typically come from the choices you make within them. While choice in gameplay will also be mentioned in this video, I specifically want to talk about the narrative choices that games can offer, with specific reference to games and moments that I personally found to be particularly memorable. A good place to start talking about choice in games has to be the Mass Effect series. But I'm not going to discuss the series as a whole or the ultimate conclusion to the series as some may expect. Rather, I'm going to look at the differences between the first and second games in regards to how both handled player choice. In particular, I want to look at the framing behind the major choices in the game and the different ways player choice is handled in each because of this framing. In both the first and second game, almost all of the diverging paths branch from one particular moment. On Virmire in the first game, and during the suicide mission on the collector base in the second. Both have conditions that must be met beforehand in order for particular characters to survive. Those are, of course, the loyalty missions in the second game, and either the retrieval of Rex's family armor or a maxed out charm meter in the first. While these two aspects may look to make up the majority of each moment, the differences are what really define each choice in my eyes. In the first game, you land on Virmire roughly halfway through the game. This is pretty important because it means the repercussions of your actions will be felt throughout the rest of the game, not just in the sequel. Mass Effect 2, on the other hand, puts these big moments in the last hour or so of the game, and very little of the impact of your decisions are felt thereafter because of this. The other reason that the second game's choices don't feel as impactful are for the fact that it's so easy to undo those poor decisions. True, if you didn't do any loyalty missions, you'll definitely lose a few squad mates, but it's very easy to go back a save file or two and make better choices the next time around. In the first Mass Effect though, you have to choose who will die. There is no happy ending where both Kaidan and Ashley make it out of Virmire alive. And because you tangibly lose something either way, you need to accept loss, to accept failure. In 2, because you can win, almost no one will accept any deaths they do cause. And while there are players who might accept their loss, see Mr. Wendell's excellent video on accepting failure in RPGs, linked via the card above, I, along with most people, did not. Now, that's not an entirely fair comparison. You are making a clear choice between Ashley and Kaidan on Virmire, and are making less clear choices during the suicide mission. But the comparison to Rex's possible death on Virmire would be fair, and again, I think the first game comes out ahead here. I believe that's the case because the notion of a loyalty mission, although not called that, makes a lot more sense in the way in which it is presented in the first game. Firstly, there's only one character whose loyalty is in question, Rex. In Mass Effect 2, your crewmates will obey your orders, loyal or otherwise. But in Mass Effect, you are asking Rex to destroy the very cure his race so desperately need. It is his loyalty that is actually being tested here, and that loyalty is being tested specifically by Rex's race, his very identity, and the enormous consequences of your actions. Everything about the moment is specific to his character, and the stakes feel personal because of this. Rex doesn't believe you're doing the right thing, and you actually need to convince him you are. 2 featured the same system and idea for every character, while at no point did any of these characters actually question or challenge your command, and thus the choices you make to keep a character alive feel more like a to-do list than actual choices that make sense within the narrative. What I'm getting at here is that the choices you make in the first game feel organic and better disguise the game's systems that facilitate these choices, while the second game feels like exactly that, a game. One with very obvious systems to interact with. All that said though, knowing that a game is a game isn't always a problem for me. Take the indie darlings Undertale or the Stanley Parable for example. Both use the fact you have particular expectations of games and their narratives in order to surprise you by subverting your expectations. In Undertale, you are frequently told to do something that you shouldn't, or that you can't do something you can. The progression systems within the game seemingly rewarded killing NPCs, while the game itself clearly didn't want you to treat Undertale the same way you would any other game. Flirting with a skeleton is shown to be a more appropriate action than fighting it. Because Undertale and games like it frame themselves as games, there are a lot of expectations that can be used to frame the choices you make within said games in an interesting light. An example of this is that you can earn EXP throughout the game if you kill the monsters you meet, something that, in games, is typically a good thing. But in Undertale's later stages, EXP is revealed to stand for execution points, not experience as one might expect. I really love this particular decision. Killing a few monsters in a typical game is no problem. You're supposed to do it and rewarded for it. But when that reward here turns out to be a mark of a negative action, of a series of acts you would never commit in real life, you're prompted to look at the choices you make, not only in Undertale, but in other games as well, from the perspective of the characters within the game. It's a subtle detail, but one that completely changes the perspective of the narrative. Because of this decision, and many others like it, the choices you make in the game feel far more important than, say, the lethal or non-lethal actions you might take in a Metal Gear Solid game. That's because Undertale admits it's a game from the get-go, but points to the fact that for the NPCs of the game, that's not the case. You, with the ability to save and reload, are terrifying to the inhabitants of Undertale if you choose to hurt them. While in a game that makes out as though you and the NPCs are equal in some way, such as the Metal Gear Solid series, you aren't as inclined to feel bad for your actions because, within the context of the game, it was them or me. With these examples in mind then, I think there are two conditions that make a choice or a series of choices memorable for me. This isn't set in stone, nor are they the only factors that contribute to a memorable moment, but largely it comes down to feeling tangible consequences of the choice, either positive or negative, after the choice has been made, and my investment in the characters or situation prior to making this choice. In Mass Effect, the loss of a squad mate is felt through the second half of the game, and you are invested in them for the fact that they are both well written, as most BioWare characters are, and for the fact that they were, bar Jenkins, the first two squad mates in the game. In the second game, I find that the consequences of your choices are less memorable for the fact that they are only felt at the end of the game. In Undertale, more so than to individual characters, although I do certainly like individual characters as well, I feel a strong connection to a sort of community, a sort of welcoming small town vibe that would disappear were I to kill the inhabitants I came across. Although, admittedly, that's something I can't bring myself to do, again for the fact that I'm genuinely attached to the characters in Undertale. Although those are two rules I believe apply to varying degrees in all video games, there is a third rule that has a large impact within specific games, and that relates to the personal experience you may have had with the sort of subject matter a game deals with. This certainly affects my experience in Undertale, but I cannot imagine a game that would affect me more personally than Life is Strange. The first element that allows for a personal involvement with the narrative is that it is set in the real world. Granted, the ability to rewind time certainly isn't realistic, but all of the characters and locations within Life is Strange feel real. In the case of one particular character, I don't only find her to feel real, but frighteningly so. Kate Marsh. Now, I have a dear friend who shares the name Kate who went through a pretty awful time, but I don't believe it's my right to tell her story. But thankfully she is still around to tell it, and there are many moments in Kate Marsh's story that struck a very personal chord, due both to my friend's experiences and, to a lesser extent, my own. I'm not going to go into specifics of those stories in this video, but I released 2 videos today, and the other one, linked at the end of this video, will be far more personal than this one, or anything else I've made before. That video should be considered a companion piece to this one. It will explain exactly why I reacted so strongly to Life is Strange, but won't focus so much on the game itself, hence why I discussed it in another video, and not in this one. Aside from personal experiences that influence many of my reactions to the game, there is a lot that Life is Strange gets right about how it frames your choices within the narrative. There's an awful lot I could talk about here, like the tasteful presentation of some of the heavier choices, or the options that aren't essential to the narrative that flesh out the world beyond the small group of people Max talks with. But this video is already starting to get a little long, and I just want to focus on the characters and the way those characters help shape the choices that are presented. All of the characters in Life is Strange are wonderful. Kate Marsh feels very, very real to me. Chloe and Max's relationship shapes almost all of the game, and smaller characters like Joyce underpin the choices you make with those that they are close to. But I really want to look at the characters of David Madsen and Frank Bowers here. Neither are friends or well known to Max, and both are pretty unpleasant at times. But like almost every character, they strike a balance between their flaws and their sympathetic traits. Take David Madsen. He's first introduced as paranoid and aggressive, and after you witness his aggression towards his own stepdaughter, it's easy to write him off as a dickhead. But of course, it's not that simple. He's a veteran and has some issues from that time, and although he appears controlling and overbearing, he is genuinely concerned for the well-being of his family and the students of Blackwell. For these traits, the choice whether to argue with him or defend him is about more than just what's right for you or Chloe. You can call out his actions, or defend him because his intentions were good, and both options are equally valid. He's not a bad guy or a good guy, he's just a guy who acted pretty badly despite holding good intentions. I love this choice, not because it has major implications, but because it's merely about who ends up being hurt, and neither answer is right. Frank Bowers, too, has much more going on than it appears initially. He deals drugs out of a filthy caravan and threatens teenagers with a blade upon the slightest provocation. But he also obviously cares very much about his dog and Rachel. Does this excuse his reaction towards other people? No, of course not. But it does frame his actions and yours in return. Before you can give Chloe's gun back, you have to be both threatened by Frank and told about some of the history between Frank and Rachel, as well as the reason he may have been so defensive about his bracelet. Is Frank dangerous? Sure. But is he also sympathetic? Absolutely. Would you be justified in being hostile towards him? Again, yes. But does he deserve a second chance that most of Arcadia Bay would deny him? I think so. It's not that these characters are so phenomenal that they transcend the very medium. It's just that everyone is portrayed in a sympathetic but honest light. Nathan straight up killed someone, but did so accidentally while being manipulated by a psychopath. He still did something awful, but it didn't come from nowhere, and he obviously feels terrible about it.
Max, it's Nathan. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt Kate or Rachel or I didn't want to hurt anybody. Everybody used me.
Indeed, Jefferson is probably the only character that isn't portrayed in such an even-handed manner. But it's hard to judge Don't Nod for the final bad guy, staying as just that, because they don't want to overshadow the final choice that Life is Strange has to offer, whether to allow Chloe to die or to escape with her, potentially leaving many others dead in the wake of a tornado. Many comments I've seen view this choice as a cop-out ending, the obvious choice. It may have been exactly where I thought the story was going, but I love that choice precisely because it's obvious. Do you relinquish this power that drove the whole story and allow your best friend to die? Or do you allow your act of saving Chloe to harm all of the rest of Arcadia Bay? It is the obvious way to conclude the story, but it isn't bad because it's obvious, and I personally think it works very well. Going back to those rules that make for a meaningful choice, it may not seem that fantastic for the fact that there is little time to feel the effects of the choice you made. But in this instance, I think that's okay for two reasons. One, the world of Life is Strange is so well established by that point that it's not hard at all to imagine what occurs in either scenario. And two, you've actually seen most of the repercussions of your choices already throughout the game. So why do I think you've already seen the outcome of your choices before you've made them? Well, let's look at the first ending where Chloe dies. You saw her die in the first moments of the game. That's no surprise. You also learned that Nathan killed Rachel and was under the influence of Mr. Jefferson, so you know he'd quickly be arrested and put the police onto Jefferson's activities. Finally, you know just how devastated her mum will be because you're human and we know these things. Looking at the other choice, we know what will happen to Arcadia Bay, and specifically to the Two Whales diner, because we already saw it happen. We also know what Max and Chloe will do, again, because we're human. They won't stay in a town where they might have been responsible for the deaths of most of the residents, and Chloe has repeatedly talked of getting out of the town in the game. So, neither ending will surprise you. But doesn't that make sense for a time travel story? You saw the consequences before you made the choice. Another indication that it's a great choice, despite going against the grain of the other choices I tend to like, is that the audience splits very neatly, almost evenly between both choices. The idea that a game could balance out the reactions people have so evenly with two significantly different endings is extremely impressive. When it comes down to it, I love all kinds of choices. Big ones and little ones, choices with unexpected outcomes, and choices that are telegraphed from the earliest moments of a game. But through all of these choices, two rules apply. If I'm not invested in the outcome, like in Metal Gear Solid, or don't have enough time to feel the consequences of that outcome, like in Mass Effect 2, I'm not going to be affected in the same way that I am by some of the choices in Mass Effect, Undertale, or Life is Strange. These are the moments I love more than any other in games. When a game can make me feel invested in a fictional narrative and give me agency, or the illusion of agency, within it, no other medium can do what games can. Of course, no other medium can do what films or TV can, and I aim to discuss both more on this channel in future. So if you've got any tips or tricks on how to do so, it'd be much appreciated if you could drop them in the comments below. Cheers, have a good one.